Geography never gives speeches. It never runs for election. It never sits at the negotiating table. Yet, it decides more than any leader, any treaty, any ideology, because in the long run, geography always wins. In 50 years, America may decide to go home. It has before. Saigon, 1975. The helicopters lifting off the embassy roof. But in 100 years, in 1,000 years, China will still be there. This is not a prediction. This is not politics. This is geography. And geography shapes destiny. Welcome to the forever neighbor. The reality Asia cannot escape. When we discuss global politics, our eyes naturally turn to ideas. We debate democracy versus authoritarianism. We debate capitalism versus communism. We debate values, principles, and systems. These debates dominate newspapers and television panels, but they distract us from a deeper, more enduring truth. In geopolitics, there is a force more powerful than ideology, more powerful than economic growth rate, more powerful than military spending. It is the one factor that does not change. No matter who gets elected, which party wins, how markets rise or fall, this force remains: geography. Americans often underestimate geography because they are blessed by it. They live on a vast, resource-rich continent. They are protected by two massive oceans. They have friendly, weaker neighbors to the north and south. This geography creates a sense of security, a sense of distance. Time and space are always on America's side. It allows Americans to believe they can choose when and where to engage with the world. Asia lives under very different conditions. Asia is not an open field. It is a crowded room. Hundreds of millions of people, ancient civilization, compressed border. And in this crowded room, one country takes up more space than all the others combined. That country is China. For thousands of years, Asian societies have lived with this reality. Vietnam, Korea, Japan, the nations of Southeast Asia, all have learned the same lesson, sometimes painfully. China is not a temporary problem to be solved. China is not a phase to be endured. China is a permanent fact. By contrast, the United States is new to Asia. It arrived in force only after World War II. It brought security, it brought trade, it brought order, and Asians welcomed it. American troops based in Japan and South Korea. The American Navy patrolled the South China Sea. American companies built factories and created jobs. For most of the century, this arrangement worked. America became Asia's security guarantor. China was not yet strong enough, and the Soviet Union was the common enemy. But across the region, there is a quiet understanding. Rarely spoken aloud, but widely shared. The United States is a visitor. China is a resident. China is the permanent neighbor, the one reality Asia cannot escape. And nowhere is this psychological truth clearer than in an unexpected country, Australia. Today, Australia lives the sharpest version of Asia's strategic dilemma. Culturally, Australia is Western. Historically, Australia is Western. Politically, Australia is Western. It shares language, institutions, and traditions with Britain and the United States. It is a core member of the Five Eyes intelligence network. It fought alongside the United States in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. At one point, an American president called Australia America's deputy sheriff in the region. But geography tells a different story. Australia does not sit in the Atlantic world. It sits on the edge of Asia, and economics follows geography. Today, Australia's prosperity is tied not to the United States, but to Asia, and above all, to China. China buys Australia's iron ore, its coal, its natural gas, its agricultural exports. China is Australia's largest trading partner by an enormous margin. The United States is far behind. This creates a painful contradiction. If Australia were to fully decouple from China, it would seriously damage its own economy. Jobs would be lost, growth would slow, living standards would fall. Yet Australia fears abandonment. As Western power slowly recedes in relative terms, Australia worries about being left behind, a Western society surrounded by an Asian strategic environment. This fear is not abstract. Australia and New Zealand would be the only Western countries in an Asian ocean. This anxiety produces a foreign policy that often seems contradictory. On one hand, Australian leaders like former Prime Minister Paul Keating argue that Australia must find its security in Asia. They believe it must integrate deeply, especially with Indonesia and Southeast Asia. On the other hand, Australia's security establishment remains deeply tied to the United States. They cling to alliances like AUKUS, not because they are perfect, but because they offer reassurance, a sense of certainty in an uncertain world. But beneath public rhetoric, Australian strategists understand a hard truth. America is far away. China is right there. Hugh White, one of Australia's leading strategic thinkers, has warned that Australia is clinging to an illusion. The illusion that America will remain the dominant power in Asia indefinitely, and that China can be forced to accept that. He argues this is wishful thinking masquerading as serious policy. In private, Australian policymakers ask a question they rarely voice publicly. If a crisis erupts in 20 years, will an American president risk Los Angeles to save Sydney? No one knows the answer. But one thing is certain: China is not going anywhere. So despite tensions and sharp rhetoric, Australia will never fully sever ties with Beijing because it cannot afford to. Australia must learn to live with the forever neighbor. If Australia is anxious, Southeast Asia is pragmatic. The ASEAN nations sit directly on China's doorstep. They do not have the luxury of distance. They have been through great power rivalry before and remember the cost. They remember the Cold War. They remember Southeast Asia becoming a battleground for competing ideologies. They remember the devastation of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And they remember one year very clearly, 1975, the year America withdrew from Vietnam. The image of helicopters lifting off from the American embassy in Saigon seared itself into the region's collective memory. It taught a brutal lesson. The United States is a democracy. Its foreign policy reflects domestic sentiment. When American voters tire, America goes home. It went home from Vietnam. It closed its bases in the Philippines. It left Afghanistan. But China does not go home. China shares land borders with Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar, and maritime borders with the rest of Southeast Asia. So ASEAN practices what is often called bamboo diplomacy. Bamboo bends with the wind, but does not break. ASEAN refuses to form a military alliance against China, not because it trusts China, but because it must live with China. Vietnam illustrates this logic perfectly. Vietnam fought a war with China in 1979. It harbors deep historical suspicion, yet China is Vietnam's largest trading partner. Vietnam has strengthened ties with the United States, but it will never join a formal anti-China alliance. The reason is simple. American warships visit occasionally. Chinese forces are present every day. ASEAN's strategy is not containment, it is engagement. Bind China with trade, bind it with diplomacy and institution. This is why ASEAN championed the world's largest free trade agreement, one that includes China, but excludes the United States. When Washington stepped away from Asian trade leadership, Southeast Asia adjusted once again. It has learned that American attention can drift. China's does not. This perception of America as a visitor is reinforced by political volatility. From an Asian perspective, Washington swings like a pendulum. One administration signs international agreement, the next withdraws. One president champions multilateralism, the next rejects it. This unpredictability makes long-term planning difficult. Asian leaders think in decades, sometimes generations. They cannot build 50-year strategies on 4-year election cycles. By contrast, China's regional strategy has shown remarkable continuity. For decades, it has focused on infrastructure, connectivity, and economic integration. This is the deeper meaning of initiatives like the Belt and Road. They are not just economic projects, they are signals of permanence. A railway cannot be withdrawn. A port does not change its mind. When China builds rail links across Southeast Asia, it is physically embedding itself in the region. Security guarantees matter, but they are abstract. Infrastructure is concrete. Asian leaders understand this distinction. In a crisis, American forces might come. China's influence is already there. This asymmetry matters. It tells Asian leaders where time is flowing. And in Asia, time flows toward the forever neighbor. So what does this mean for the future of the Asia-Pacific? It does not mean Asia wants the United States to leave. On the contrary, most Asian countries want the United States to stay engaged. They want American naval power keeping sea lanes open. They want American investment. They want American ideas. They want America as a balance, but not as a hegemon. There is a difference. The era when the United States could dictate terms in Asia is ending, not because America has failed, but because China has returned. Asia will not be an American lake, nor will it be a Chinese lake. The Pacific will not belong to one power. It will be shared. Asian nations will maneuver carefully. They will use American security to balance China's power. They will use China's prosperity to balance America's unpredictability, but they will never join a crusade to eliminate China because they know it cannot be done. China is not an artificial empire. It is a civilization. It has fallen before and risen again. For the United States, the wisest path forward is to accept this reality, to compete without trying to eject China from its own neighborhood, to offer positive alternatives, to re-engage economically, and to respect Asia's autonomy. If America does this, it will always be welcome in Asia. But if it offers instability while demanding loyalty, Asia will quietly adjust. Geography does not argue. It endures. And in Asia, geography means living with China, the forever neighbor. This is episode 2 of U.S. versus China, the New World Order. If you want to understand the forces reshaping the 21st century, the economic wars, the tech battles, the military standoffs, subscribe now. We'll break down the strategies, expose the miscalculations, and predict the future. Because the New World Order is being written right now, and you need to know what's coming.